All right, let's dive into India's 2026-27 Union Budget. Now, I know a budget can sound like a bunch of dry numbers, but trust me, this is way more than that. It's really a roadmap for the entire nation's future. So let's unpack this plan and see what it tells us about India's biggest ambitions, and more importantly, how it's going to get there.
So, what's the big idea behind all of this? Well, at the very heart of this budget is one powerful vision, Viksit Bharat, which translates to Developed India. And this is not just some catchy slogan. It really signals a major shift, a move from just making small, incremental progress to aiming for a huge, comprehensive goal, balancing ambitious economic growth with development that touches every single citizen.
So the big question is, how do you actually achieve something that massive? Well, the strategy is guided by a really clear three-part philosophy. First, choosing decisive action over just sitting on the fence. Second, focusing on deep structural reform instead of just empty talk. And third, prioritizing what's best for people in the long run over short-term populist wins.
To make sense of it all, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the grand vision, the big picture. Then, we'll drill down into the economic pillars that are supposed to hold it all up. We'll see how the budget focuses on people, we'll follow the money to see where it comes from and where it's going, and we'll wrap up with the all-important fiscal bottom line.
Okay, first up, the grand vision. This isn't just about setting goals. It's about understanding the core principles and the duties that really anchor every single decision made in this budget.
So, the whole vision is really built around these three kartavyas, which are essentially duties. The first is to speed up and sustain economic growth. The second is to empower people, giving them the tools to fulfill their own dreams. And the third is to make absolutely sure that development is inclusive, that no community gets left behind.
A grand vision is great, but it's nothing without a solid plan to back it up. And that brings us right to the pillars of the economy. Think of this as the actual blueprint designed to power India's economic engine.
The entire economic strategy is built on these 6 pillars. They cover everything from keeping growth going and strengthening the country's foundations to ensuring development is people-centric and that governance is solid. Each one of these pillars is a critical piece of the puzzle.
All right, let's dig into that first pillar, a major push to supercharge manufacturing. The goal here is pretty clear. Boost what's made in the country, rely less on imports, and really establish India as a global manufacturing heavyweight.
And this isn't just talk. The plan is backed by some very specific, high-impact initiatives. For example, the India Semiconductor Mission 2.0. This is all about building a domestic chip ecosystem, which is absolutely crucial for tech self-reliance. And you see similar big pushes in biopharma and even in rare earth minerals. Each one of these targets a strategic, high-growth sector.
Okay, so manufacturing is getting a boost, but you can't build things if you can't move them around, right? That brings us to the next pillar, which is all about strengthening the very backbone of the economy, infrastructure. Because without modern roads, railways, and ports, that growth we talked about just can't happen at scale.
And if you want to see just how serious the government is about this, look at these numbers. Public capital expenditure, or CapEx, which is just money spent on long-term assets, is projected to jump 6-fold between 2015 and 2027. That's a massive increase. This isn't just spending, it's a huge investment in the country's future.
So where is all that money going? Well, into some truly transformative projects. We're talking new freight corridors to make logistics faster, opening up 20 new national waterways for transport, and even a scheme to promote seaplanes for better connectivity. It's all about creating this seamless network for moving goods and people around.
All right, we talked a lot about the macro economy, the big picture stuff. But now, let's pivot to the micro level. This part is all about how these big plans are supposed to translate into direct benefits and real opportunities for citizens.
Because at the end of the day, economic growth doesn't mean much if it isn't making life better for everyday people. And this brings us right back to that core idea of Viksit Bharat. It means creating specific programs designed to empower different groups in society and make sure development is truly for everyone.
Let me give you a few cool examples of what this looks like. You've got She-Marts, which aim to create community-owned retail stores run by women. Then there are the Divyanjan schemes, which focus on giving skills training and access to assistive devices for persons with disabilities. There's even a huge initiative to train caregivers, building what's called a robust care economy.
Okay, we've seen the vision, the plans, and the people-centric schemes. Now for the really big question. How is all of this getting paid for?
It's time to follow the money. It's the most fundamental question for any budget, right? When the government has a rupee in its wallet, where did that rupee actually come from?
This chart tells the whole story. You can see the single biggest chunk, 24% of every rupee, actually comes from borrowings. That reliance on debt is definitely a key factor to watch. After that, you've got income tax, corporation tax, and GST as the next biggest contributors. Together, these four sources make up the vast majority of the government's income.
And on the flip side, where is that rupee going? Well, the largest slice, 22%, goes right back to the states as their share of taxes. Now look at the next biggest expense. 20% is for interest payments on government debt. Central government schemes and defense spending also take up pretty significant chunks.
And finally, let's look at the big picture of financial management. This last section is all about fiscal discipline and making sure that countries' finances are being handled responsibly.
You know, the key number to watch for a country's financial health is the fiscal deficit. It's basically the gap between what the government spends and what it earns. And as this chart shows, there is a very clear downward trend. This whole process is called fiscal consolidation, and it's all about bringing that deficit down from the higher levels we saw a few years ago.
And that brings us to the crucial number. The target for the 2026-27 budget is a fiscal deficit of 4.3% of GDP. This number is a really important signal. It's the government basically saying, we are committed to being prudent and maintaining economic stability.
So there you have it, the 2026-27 budget in a nutshell. It's a story of disciplined ambition, trying to balance a grand vision for a developed India with the hard numbers of fiscal responsibility. The blueprint is definitely clear. But the real question, the one we're all left with, is how effectively will these plans on paper translate into tangible progress on the ground?